And good afternoon, everybody. Or actually, it's actually late morning. I've got another show at 1 o'clock today. I'm Ann Vandersteel. Welcome to Steel News. We're going to be having a very interesting discussion today because this is something that's still lingering back from the COVID years, and we don't really have resolution on it. There's a lot of theories out there. But as you guys know, for years, the world was told a single unified story that we had a novel virus, a global emergency, an invisible enemy. I think Trump even called it the invisible enemy, if I remember from the press conferences. But there's a lot of conjecture out there, and that narrative is no longer really staying mainstream. It's not holding the water that it used to. And it's not because people out there have their own conspiracy theories on it, but frankly, it's because the questions have been getting a lot louder. And if you are watching anybody in the medical freedom space, there's a lot of people out there talking about a lot of different reasons for COVID and what really is the mechanisms of action in COVID. These are also coming from people that don't even have medical backgrounds, but they're ones that these are the people we've been told to trust, basically. So recently, there was a statement made that stopped me in my tracks. In fact, I am going to pull this up here right now because I want to show you all what I'm talking about here. Hang on. Let's see if I can get this up. All right. You guys should see this right now. There's a died suddenly post. You guys seeing that? I think you guys are. Hang on one second. Where did it go? There we go. Okay, so there was a died suddenly post here that said the investigator at died suddenly has received a very concerning piece of intel that we wanted to share with our followers regarding the war in Iran. Over the course of the last 4 years, the same source has given us intel that we have shared that has never once been wrong. It's a very long post, but they're talking about, whether or not you should have discernment over America has only 1 week of missiles left to defend the allies in the Middle East, whether there's nukes, invasions, and war with Russia on the table. And then they go on to address the fact that Joe Kent resigned for one simple reason. He knows the Iran war is going poorly, was started purely by Israel lying and manipulating Trump, and he refuses to lie about those facts publicly. Well, this post continues to go on, but what really stood out to me was this post that followed it in response from Dr. Braun. More than likely, he says, Joe Kent disagrees with the use of a bioweapon to end this conflict. Wow. Okay. He says Iranians are extremely high risk genetically to exposure to the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2. He calls it Agent SVX. And he says it can be aerosolized for deployment, meaning there's no virus needed. It's activated by EMF, rapid repeated pulses of microwave radiation, and dimmed scattered sunlight, which we know there's 5G towers going up. And this morning they were spraying like hell, understanding that I believe Israel is financing a lot of this. I'm seeing these posts out there right now. And it would be difficult for anyone with a conscience to justify the use of this deadly weapon. Okay, so that being said, it really did stop me in my tracks, and I found it pretty amazing that somebody would come out and say that. So I reached out to Dr. Braun. He is a counterterrorism and biothreat expert. He posted that what we may be dealing with is not just a virus, but that something could be deployed without one. And I'm going to say right now that I believe it was Sasha Latapova that I was speaking with years ago when I told her how I contracted COVID in 2020 in DC at CPAC. And I don't remember anybody being sick there, but I remember a text message that came from Matt Schlapp, a broadcast text saying, hey, there was COVID at CPAC. I was deathly sick, beyond deathly sick. And Sasha said, well, it was down. CPAC is next door to where they manufactured this stuff. And they actually have the patent for the aerosolization of COVID. So, this is now these dots and pieces are starting to connect me. I find it very interesting. But anyway, there's a spike protein based mechanism that can be deployed without actually having to have a virus in itself. And so if you potentially aerosolize this, you can now potentially weaponize it. So now you guys, you can agree with that. You can reject it, whatever you want, but you can't ignore what this implies. And I just gave you my personal real life example and what happened to me. And then I learned years later that Sasha said, yeah, there definitely is a patent for this. Because even if part of that's true, we're not just talking about a pandemic, right? I think every time, I said this yesterday on the show, when the government lips are moving, they're lying. But we're actually talking about real biowarfare. And we know that Victoria Nuland testified that we have biolabs over in Ukraine. I mean, that has all been exposed in the last few years. But this is where you guys got to really dial in, because it gets really important that when you consider that the public was told to stay at home, trust the science, and wait for a vaccine, there were experts outside the traditional medical system, obviously, analyzing through a completely different lens. And thank God, because they were looking at the threat assessment. Because what if the real issue was never just the virus? What if the spike protein itself, the very component in countermeasures, which is what we know is injected in these shots, spike protein, that's what's causing all these heart attacks and blood clots and strokes, et cetera. The inflammation is out of control. What if all that was really the primary driver of harm? And now we're seeing doctors saying that long COVID responds to antibiotics, while others are pointing to some kind of fungal involvement. And now we're also hearing that there's even more disruptive. That's what we've been calling the SARS-CoV-2 may no longer exist as a singular natural virus at all. And if that's true, this changes basically everything. This is why I wanted to bring on Dr. Tal Braun today to talk about this, because frankly, this is in my opinion, very, very concerning. Dr. Braun, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you allowing me to kind of lead the audience into why we're having this discussion.
That was a great summary. Thank you. And thank you, Anne. Thanks for having me on here. That was a really good summary. I wrote to let me give you a little bit of my background in terms of how I got into this work, right? So I'm a clinical psychologist by background. When I moved to the States, I got into the wellness industry for a while. I understood the importance of an integrative health, an integrative model, especially as it relates to chronic illnesses. And so I include that piece because when you fast forward to where we are right now in 2026, everybody's looking for this, this magic bullet, right? This magic pill, I should say, to end the suffering in terms of the vaccine injury and what people call COVID. And my background in terms of the wellness industry helped me to realize that fixing a problem like this it's never just one thing. And so what my career took a turn in terms of as much as I was enjoying the wellness industry, I really wanted to have an impact on what was taking place in terms of the mass shootings at schools specifically. This was also post 9/11. I just started realizing that with my background and coming from South Africa, I could have impact in the counterterrorism and violence prevention space. And I focused on mass killing. I focused on the intentional act of somebody or a group of people wanting as many people not only injured but killed as possible. And so for over a decade, that's what I focused on, and I became a national go-to expert in threat assessments, threat management, and counterterrorism. The pandemic starts, and I heard about the inklings of a pandemic before January of 2020, when somebody reached out to me from China and said, "Can you start shipping me masks from the US back to China?" And I was like, that makes no sense. You guys produce them. Why would I be shipping you your masks for your workers in your factory? Where are the masks? And he said, something's going on over here, and they are literally warehousing. They're taking back the masks and they're warehousing them, but they're also telling us that we need masks. And I've sourced this. I can't remember exactly what mask.
What year was this?
This was 2019. This was December of 2019, before the world even heard anything.
Right.
This is a connection of mine that has factories in China, and so I was like, wait, something's going on. Then we start hearing about this in January. But from a professional standpoint, what started happening with me is that if I'm in the mass killing space, and bioterrorism intersects with biowarfare, of course, and the use in terrorism with biological agents, people immediately, from when this started occurring and the public became aware of it, and then professionals became aware of it, they started just turning to me and saying, "Doc, is this biowarfare?" And I couldn't just give like a quick oh, I think it's this, I think it's that. I mean, my career rests on fact, right? If you're trying to stop a mass killing somewhere, there's no wishy-washy about it. You either got a threat or you don't have a threat. Right. And so I started working on, as soon as they released the sequence, and said, this is what we're dealing with, and here's the sequence of this new novel virus. I started researching and trying to work out what is this thing, what's the closest match to it, and also just reaching out to as many people as I could in that space, right? So pathologists that had worked on coronavirus vaccine development. So right from the start, I started unpacking, and particularly because I'm not a virologist, I was looking at this purely from a weapons standpoint, and it didn't take me more than just like probably a week to realize that the pathology was driven by the spike protein. That
Mm-hmm.
the actual weapon that they were talking about in terms of sequence is that
Mm-hmm.
the pathology was driven by this thing that they were calling the spike protein, and it didn't need a virus. That was like one of my earliest findings, and so um, I emailed the my contacts at the FBI, the behavioral unit that I was associated with,
Mm-hmm.
and also I emailed the um, Don Alway, who at the time was the director of the weapons of mass destruction, and I emailed and I said, first, this was in June of 2021, and I said, here's the thing, here I'm paraphrasing, of course. What we're dealing with is not a respiratory disease at all. This is much closer to an envenomation. And I said the death toll as it stands right now is high, but what we're looking at in terms of the spike protein being used in a vaccine, we're looking at a major, major catastrophe, because the spike protein in itself, and these are the words I used in June of 2021, in itself, the spike protein is pathological and it
Mm-hmm.
can be aerosolized. I had already looked at other ways that this could be used, and one of the things I found is I found enough information that you can put this in the air, and that it would you'd breathe it in, and you didn't need any of the viral mechanisms that they describe, and you'd get the same pathology. And those were very, very early findings.
Okay, so if that's true, you heard my open where I talked about how I came back from CPAC, got a terrible sore throat and a wicked bad headache right at the bottom of the top of the brainstem, going in so terrible, so painful I couldn't even lay on my head. High fever, 103.5 for 10 days. Literally was out of it. I woke up to President Trump doing a press conference, and he was reading Dr. Zelenko's letter on at the press conference about hydroxychloroquine, and that's when I found Dr. Zelenko and did his first interview ever on a podcast. But is it possible that I was part of the aerosolized victims, and would I have presented with those symptoms?
So here's what I know, and here's what I don't know. The one aspect that I've looked at is that the pandemic never started with a novel virus at all. That it actually started in 2019. From July onwards, Moderna was running clinical trials
Mm-hmm.
using a spike protein
Mm-hmm.
and using mRNA. And what happened in 2019, differently from the year before, because the clinical trials actually started in 2017, then they ramped up in 2018, and then their stage 3 clinical trial with more participants and a different mechanism started in July of 2019. Right. So you have mRNA being used on the public. You have mRNA being tested on terminally ill patients. They are already immune compromised, and they added a drug called Keytruda, which is
Mm-hmm.
called a checkpoint drug, and
Mm-hmm.
that has impact in terms of the fact that that actually increases the likelihood of gut dysbiosis, meaning that that's those fragments that they were using in their mRNA from 2019. Those fragments get taken up by microbes. This is the biggest difference in terms of where I'm at with this work as compared to virologists. I do not believe that the spike protein replicates like they say using the ACE2 receptor, getting into cells. What I think is happening, and what I think the science is showing, is that the spike protein is produced just the way that they make it in a factory. How do you make spike protein in a factory? It is a process very similar to making a food like miso, a fermentation process that
Mm-hmm.
needs both bacteria and yeast, right? So we
Hmm.
all know, for example, beer is made with bacteria. But you're ultimately are introducing a foreign protein into a system of yeast and bacteria that then replicate those fragments. So there's that is, to me, the a major reason why something like shedding takes place, and why they say that they say that the mRNA vaccines cannot shed. But if you are producing toxic fragments and it's being produced by bacteria and fungi, it absolutely sheds, because what happens is the body does not like those toxins. And so what it does is it puts them into something called exosomes, and exosomes travel around the body. We already know that the spike protein has been found in exosomes. There's major research that shows that. And then exosomes get shed in body secretions. So there's one part of this for me is that the pandemic is about mRNA, and it's about shedding. And that the more that this protein gets produced in the human body, the more the long-term impact that we all have. The other way that proves that is that if you are vaccinated, you have a short window where you are basically being given an immune stimulant. And at the same time as getting an immune stimulant, what it also does is it basically tames down the inflammation part.
Right.
So while the vaccinated are shedding, they're shedding onto unvaccinated people. They're shedding onto people that are vaccinated, but that window is over, which is why they tell you to go get boosted, right?
Right.
And so during that window, when somebody doesn't have that bumped up immune system, they're going to have impact. Now, the piece that you saw in that post in terms of the use of a bioweapon is that, if you remember, there was a hot mic moment where RFK at a dinner somewhere mentioned that this is that the spike protein has genetic risk, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing, because at least the part that I've been talking about in terms of, and this was years ago, that the genetic risk part will now start being looked at and discussed, but it's still crickets out there. People do not know that there are that the impact of the spike protein on the body is mostly driven, the pathology part, the getting sick, getting these clots, landing up with a stroke, all of that is driven by genetic risk, and ultimately it's also one of the giveaways to that is, once you have a genetic ancestral profile, it also affects blood type. So, for example, type A is the highest risk to spike protein. So when people find that out, they're like, that is crazy, because I'm type A and my husband's not type A. And
what about type O?
So type O, I can actually tell you right now, because I pulled up my notes so that
Is
I can.
O positive matter? I'm just curious, because I know that there was some conjecture, and I've spoken with another doctor, as a radiologist, and I want to say Franz, Paul, you're welcome. Thank you. We're glad to cover this. He said that there was the K26R gene, which is also immune to this.
So type O is actually the lowest. So as much as you got symptoms, and as much as you said that you had this profound headache, it didn't sound like it progressed, right? You didn't land up in a.
I never went to the hospital. I said, the hell with that. But I was really sick I haven't been that sick for 10 days consecutively for a long time. And then I had shortness of breath. I couldn't breathe for like 2 years. And finally I started doing the budesonide and all the other treatments. But and I would get the headaches every now and then, sort of that nagging, weird, feels like a radiation headache in the back of the head. I don't know how else to describe it.
So that's the difference in terms of the fact of you can hear that there is recovery. You can hear that there were solutions for you. You can hear that you didn't land up, in our hospital on remdesivir. The other thing, and I'll try and keep as many thoughts as I can, but there's just so much information that people don't know, and so I'll flood as much information.
Flood the zone.
So we talk about remdesivir as
Yep.
that pathway, and we talk about other drugs that we use like midazolam, but a huge giveaway of purposeful killing of people that would have actually recovered was the use of propofol. And propofol was used in the hospitals when they said that they need to keep these patients sedentary, that they need to calm their anxiety down. But that was part of the process of the remdesivir and the propofol that caused people to end up needing or saying that they needed a ventilator. And the reason for propofol is that it's counterindicated to the pathology that the spike protein is causing. If you are suppressing your respiratory system, and if you are essentially shutting down the diaphragm, and then you add propofol, you're ultimately killing somebody. You're switching them off. The other thing that I just want to say, because I think it will feed into the entirety of this conversation. It's 6 years later, and we are absolutely in mainstream, no further in people understanding like the pathology that they call long COVID and that they call vaccine injury, and they're trying to come up with all these antivirals. For your audience, I can tell you that the simplest way to understand what that spike protein does is it basically hijacks 3 circuits in the body. And these circuits are there as mammals, and certain mammals, like the bat, for example, are going to be able to cope with these circuits being triggered more than a human being. So what are those 3 circuits? The 3 circuits are, firstly, hibernation, right? So in other words, it's that spike protein hits the system. And this is where it gets really interesting. If you are genetically at risk, you do not need replication. You just need this thing to enter the nasal passage, okay? Go into the nasal passage, trigger the olfactory system, trigger the vagal nerve, and then you go into that circuit. You don't need, it's not about quantity at all, right? It's like the difference between an accelerator that you push down on and just an on-off switch, right? An on-off switch just triggers the whole mechanism. It's not quantity. So that's one mechanism, right? And people can recognize, okay, we don't talk like this in terms of human beings, but what is hibernation and torpor? We call it fatigue, right? In a human being, when that circuit gets triggered and you desperately are, just have zero energy, like when this hits people, you can barely stand up, right? You just do a few things and you're absolutely exhausted. If people are recovering and they go and work out, they get post exercise malaise. So what's happening is the body is wanting to be in this hibernation state, a low metabolism shutdown state. That's mechanism number 1. Mechanism number 2 is an envenomation. And I'm actually having Dr. Artis is having me on his show in just a little while today. And
good. I was just going to ask you, are you connected to Brian?
I'm absolutely connected to Brian. And an interesting thing with Brian is, as soon as you mention anything to do with to venom, people always say, "Oh, so Dr. Artis was right," and he was right. But Dr. Braun, in terms of me, I was actually 2 years ahead of Dr. Artis on the venom information. And I absolutely am so grateful for Dr. Artis, because what he was able to do that I was not able to do is make sure that people heard about the venom. And when we finally were able to get a starting point on that venom information coming out, not only would mainstream shut us down, but the biggest damage on the venom information came from within our own movement. Right?
Wow.
Brian and I were absolutely immediately suppressed for that information.
Yeah,
both of us got kicked out of groups. Both of us weren't allowed on stages anymore. People that are trusted people in this movement online, they absolutely went and they did huge amount of damage control, making sure that
who were some of the bigger names that were really doing the damage control?
Pierre Corey was one of them. I was on a call. I was the only non-medical doctor to sign a document that looked at ivermectin.
Mm-hmm.
And that was out of the UK, a UK group, and Tess Laurie. I was included in that group, and on the first call that we had discussing ivermectin, at the end of that call, I started talking about venom and the venom analogs. And Pierre Corey was one of them that absolutely shut this down. He wrote a Substack to say that it was absolute nonsense. I was in Peter McCullough's COVID-19 group. As soon as I brought the venom information to the table and explained what's happening in the body with the substance like PLA2, which is part of an analog, meaning a similar sequence. Functionally, it can do the same thing. As soon as I started explaining all of these mechanisms as it related to venom and the venom analogs, I was kicked out of Peter McCullough's group. No explanation. Texted him numerous times after that to ask, like, what the heck? Like, is this to do? Like, I had no idea, like, what that was.
Yeah. Well, apparently he thinks he's the arbiter of whatever's fact and not real.
There's many people that did damage for two main reasons. One, I think ignorance. I think that the science of this is out of most people's realms, and medical doctors they never want to seem incompetent, and they never want to seem like they don't know everything, and then that they're not godlike. And so that was a huge part of why these people couldn't. They don't study functional homology. They don't understand geometric shapes as it relates to molecular biology. And so they just needed a person like myself to spend the time explaining it to them. And then they would have seen that Brian and I were never talking about actual venom, right? We were talking about the sequences that were published, that were known, that came from peer-reviewed papers. And another interesting piece to this is those that have recognized the venom analogs to this day have not made a big fuss of it. In other words, they have not connected it to the driving of disease. They'll recognize that it's there. They won't deny that it's there, but they won't acknowledge that using those sequences would essentially create an envenomation in the body. Another person like that would be the anonymous account Jicky Leaks. There's a whole stream of people that I actually recently blocked because part of what will come from within our own community is there's three main things that I found that they won't allow information on. Venom being one of them, Malone being another one. There are a group of people that absolutely, for whatever reason, any criticism of Dr. Malone is immediate.
You froze. This is the timing of this freeze is so funny. I can't believe it. I don't know if you can hear me, Dr. Braun, but you seem to have disappeared, and you were talking about Robert Malone. It's just really funny. Would like to know what the last one is. Maybe he'll go out and come back in. Wow, this is fascinating. So this is, and thanks, Christy, for being here. The irony, right, Franz? The irony of it that he mentions Bob Malone's name, who's now apparently left the ACIP committee because he said he's just done, whatever that means. I haven't followed Bob Malone's post recently to see what's going on there. But I know that he sued the Bregans, who were good friends of Dr. Zelenko, who was my dear friend. And he also sued Dr. Jane Ruby, who is a nurse practitioner. I guess he'll come back in when he can get his service back up. He sued those two folks, or three people, I should say, for $25 million each. The Bregans for $25 million and Jane Ruby for $25 million over defamation. He lost. The case was dismissed, but it cost those folks, I don't know, $60,000, $70,000, I think, in lawyers' fees each to get to dismissal. So that is very, does have a chilling effect. So when people disagree with Dr. Malone, I guess that's what he chose to do. And it looks like we're going to get Dr. Braun in here. So hang on one second. Dr. Braun, that's so funny. You said Bob Malone and boom.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that was just coincidental. And
I hope so. Some other folks in
my
here.
own hotspot. But wow, timing in life is really, really interesting. As a psychologist, one of the things that I used to incorporate into my practice was the universe is funny like that. So when you're watching people trying to make some form of therapeutic breakthrough, there's often like randomly or so-called randomly at the exact moment they're about to tell like the thing that's bothering them the most, or the trauma that they went through, the confession, something happens in terms of like out of nowhere, like a bulldozer will
Right.
arrive, right?
Right.
And so it's always within ourselves to recognize those moments where we have to push through either the inconvenience, the dropping
Yeah.
of Wi-Fi, a purposeful cancellation. We have to push through. Like that's
Sure.
the way breakthroughs make. That's the way that the truth will always find a way. Right. It's
Right.
up to us to continue doing that. So Bob
You had
Malone.
mentioned two things. You have Envenomation and Malone. What was the
Okay, so
third?
yeah, and the third one is graphene oxide. If
Graphene
you
oxide.
if
Yeah.
if anybody that's researching this, or if anybody's discussing the vaccine, the minute they discuss graphene oxide, there's an attacking mob that will come out that makes sure that nobody hears any information. I can tell you that I have not spent that much time looking at the potential of graphene oxide being in the vaccine. I have not seen adequate research like I did in terms of the other aspects that I've looked at. However, I can tell anybody that part of what I think that they're doing, and they may have actually that they may have included graphene in certain of the vaccines, because this is essentially when the vaccines got rolled out, it was a massive clinical trial, right? It was an experiment. It was
Wasn't
EAU.
there also some evidence of a 2015? I think it was an Army. They were testing the Moderna shot in 2015, COVID shots. Maybe it wasn't Moderna, COVID shots in 2015 on members of the U.S. Army.
That I haven't heard. That I haven't heard. But I
Okay.
definitely follow up and look at that with the
I'll go
graphene
and look for
oxide.
it. Yeah,
The
I'll find
the
that and send it to you.
With the graphene oxide, what we can move on to when I talk about the other mechanisms that are involved here, with the graphene oxide, I suspect what's happening with these so-called vaccines, which aren't vaccines at all, is that they are preparing the human body for graphene oxide. And some of the pathways that I've looked at that I haven't spoken publicly about yet is I've also been looking at the human body producing graphene oxide on its own. So changing the circuitry and changing the structure of the human body to basically become two things: connectable, right? So people talk about the Internet of all things, right? So that we all
Yeah,
connected,
Internet of Bodies. Yep.
Internet of bodies, but also batteries. There's a lot of people that understand that if they make us, we are obviously already electrical, but if they are able to tap into that electricity that we produce,
Yeah,
that
wide area bodies networks.
then we become a battery, and you can
Yeah.
actually then take energy from that, right? So get into to how that relates to the vaccines in a minute, but covering the other circuits really quickly. You've got the hibernation, you have envenomation, and the third circuit gets really interesting because that is called immune. It's an immune tolerance circuit, and that's where the cancers are coming from. Because
Okay.
what happens with the spike protein is that it is, because it's a foreign protein, the body does not like it, and the body certainly won't will not replicate it, and the body wants to get rid of it in exosome
Yeah.
as quick as possible. And so how do you keep a foreign protein in the body from not being attacked? The closest match that somebody can visualize is that's exactly what takes place during pregnancy. During pregnancy, you've got foreign protein,
Yep.
right? You have DNA that's not yours,
Right.
right? You have your own DNA that you've given to your child, and then you have the father's DNA. Okay, and so pregnancy requires, and this is where virologists, like, if there's one science that I'd say is the dumbest science on the planet, and that is a pseudoscience, it's virology. because even for people that don't believe in viruses, what I would say to them is, do you believe in prompts? Do you believe in code? Right. So we
Okay.
all know from using AI now, we all know, like, if you want a signal to somebody, if I want somebody to go that way, I point. So viruses are short pieces of code, right? Short pieces of protein that let the body know that the body needs to do something, and they're functional. So we all talk about viruses in a way that they're out to kill us, and people talk about them in a way that's really strange. Like they make them sound like that they've got a brain, that they can think. They tell you that viruses are really sneaky, and that they are mutating because they're getting cleverer. All these words, right, is really ridiculous, because what you've got is you've got a piece of protein, and you've got fat, and some of them have sugar, right? So like a glycoprotein, like the spike protein. So that would be like the equivalent of me saying, like, oh, that's really weird. The hamburger at the front of my refrigerator didn't want to get eaten, so it moved itself to the back. It's protein, carbohydrate, and fat. How did it think about moving itself?
How did it become sentient? Got it.
Exactly, right. And it's the
Right.
same way, right? These are not sentient anything. All they are is that they are code, and they're not only code that changes the state of a body, but they also community based. So that they spread amongst the community, that code, in preparation for something, right? And so in the case of the spike protein, it's actually in the sequence, it's tagged with something called galectin 3. And galectin 3 is the reason that it gets tagged as safe and don't attack it. Now, the problem with putting that into a vaccine, right, that is then replicating fragments, is you
Right.
land up with too much galectin in the body, and now it starts tagging cells all over the place. And if it's getting into cancer, right, because there's and biofilm, those fragments tagging it as safe allow it to grow
Go
bigger,
unchecked. Yeah.
right? It go unchecked, right?
Yeah.
It's going unchecked. It's literally saying, don't mess with us. And while that structure, while that colony, let's say, if it's a biofilm, while that colony of bacteria and fungi, and even parasites throughout the body, if they are left unchecked, because we say that they're safe, obviously that's when you can have all of these cancers that are going unnoticed until it's too late.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no symptoms for it. The body is not trying to destroy it. And so those are the three circuits, and they match every single piece of the symptoms and the pathology of COVID. That's the easiest way to understand this thing called the spike protein.
So characterize your position versus the mainstream consensus based on what you just told me.
The mainstream consensus says that there was a virus that they haven't found yet, that they said that mutated, and that they can't find the missing piece, right, in terms of how this mutated. They say that it basically that the epicenter, or the beginning of it, was Wuhan, right, the Wuhan market.
Right.
And they say that at that point, then it started spreading around the world. Okay, that's mainstream. That's the mainstream narrative. The second narrative that's not mainstream but is also upheld is there were a bunch of people at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and including Barrick's work, and that they designed and engineered a virus that spread around the world, right? So that's a narrative that also is the most discussed. So you have zoonotic, as everybody knows, and then you have lab leak. There is a third, which is where I am, that this is not zoonotic at all, that it is not a lab leak, but that my position on this is that this is an intentional use of a bioweapon, and that bioweapon is not difficult to find at all, right? In terms of where they found it.
Right.
And the easiest way that I can tell this story is that in 2012, there was a copper mine, an old copper mine in Yunnan province in China, and 6 workers went in there, and they were there for, I think it was 2 weeks cleaning. Okay, out of the 6 workers, 3 died. Okay, they landed up in hospital. They had at the time what people discussed was, they said that it was a SARS like virus was one of the things that they were looking at. The second part to that is that they then said it was fungal. But here's the interesting part about this: what they died of and what they had, and every match of the pathology and all their blood work. And if you remember at the beginning of the so-called pandemic in 2020, they were saying people were getting these glass opacity infiltrates in their lungs, was a big marker. Well, the miners got that too. These workers in the mine, they essentially got every aspect. There was no difference in their pathology as COVID. So in 2012, we already had COVID.
Interesting. Interesting.
And now
I have a doctor in here, by the way, Dr. Elizabeth Eads. She's in the chat. She's calling it a bioweapon. She's sharing this, and I actually did hospital, not with her. I collaborated with her on hospital rescues during COVID, and she was fantastic.
It's 100% a bioweapon, but it's not a complicated bioweapon. I think this is where if in my world in counterterrorism, the times where there is a mass casualty that is successful for a terrorist and for a mass killer is the times where their plan was not complicated. The more complicated something gets, the less likely it is to work, right? Occam's razor, right? The simplest way. And so what they purposefully do, and where the lab leak theory and where the zoonotic theory is just wasted our time for 6 years, is that they've overcomplicated all of this. Because if I wanted to inflict the world, if I wanted to have done, if I was the person that did this, right, to the planet, all I would have done is I would have gone to that old copper mine, and I would have done what those workers were doing. They were cleaning bat shit, guano.
Right.
Okay, guano. That guano as a powder, if I brought it into a room and I had let's say a quarter of a teaspoon, okay, into a confined space, and I blew it off that teaspoon, okay, every single person in the room would get COVID.
Really?
From the batshit.
Interesting.
From that specific, this is why they had so much interest in it, and this is why they went back several times from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They made several trips back to that copper mine. Now, the reason for that particular guano being so deadly is you had a whole bunch of circumstances that made that highly toxic. And the reason for it being highly toxic is it's a copper mine, and copper is supposed to kill microbes, right? So I've got this is where I can plug my product over here. This is a product that I developed in 2020, and then into 2021 is when it first came out, and it's just come back. I've just made it come back. It's called Copperine, and you breathe it in, and it's copper based. It's a nasal spray that is copper based, and the reason that it's copper is that copper kills microbes.
Correct.
Copper in itself is antimicrobial, it's antiviral, and it's antifungal. So if you have a copper mine where you have bats living and you have a complete ecosystem that is really, really high in 2 things, copper and iron, anything that survives in there in terms of a bacteria and a fungus is going to be extremely potent, right? Because it should kill them. So essentially, when we use the term, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, Okay,
Yeah.
the copper in that mine and the iron levels in that mine led to bacterial and fungal strains and sequences that they isolated that are survival sequences.
So
Okay,
are they using batshit in the fabrication and manufacturing of the spike protein?
I think that once they had the back shit, all they had to do is purify it. I think
Wow.
that
Yeah, the
Moderna.
sequencing. Wow.
So
Because
Moderna.
I wanted to draw
Yeah, go ahead.
my Christy here says many after heavy spraying from the atmosphere seem to be complaining of respiratory issues. She reads it all day long. I do too. They're
Yeah,
back to spraying outside. Are they spraying that stuff up there? Are they delivering bioweapons of various,
they
flu
may have
candidates?
in 2020. They may
Yeah.
still be doing it now in terms of aerosolized spike protein. Look at how they, I study psychopaths. So one of the giveaways of psychopaths is that they love to play with their prey, right? So like a
Cat
cat,
and the mouse.
right? Cat and a mouse, and there's
Yeah.
reasons for that, right? It's not just cruelty. When you have the prey captive, and especially with younger animals, they do this. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to test your reflexes. If you
Hmm.
if they were starving to death, they would eat it right away. But if
Right.
they are not afraid that it gets away or they have control of it, they will play with it to get to know it, to learn its tricks, to see how it moves, so that they get better. Right? They're training. It's just any other learning model. And so psychopaths not only learn from us, but it's pleasurable. It's pleasurable to psychopaths. And so look at the current variant that they say that's out there. They gave it a nickname. It's called cicada. What do cicadas do? They remain dormant
For
until
17 years.
activated.
Yeah. Every 17 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what they've done now is that a sequence of this that came out of South Africa, okay, is cicada, and they've activated it. And this is where your post comes in terms of the bioweapon specifically for Iran. So we go full circle in our conversation over here. The
Hmm.
genetic risk, the highest risks are the countries with nuclear weapons, okay, except one, right? So if we have a look at the countries that have nuclear weapons, like who are they, right? You got India, you got Pakistan, and you had Iran, and
Hmm.
you've got Israel, and you've got the US. So the highest risk are actually Indian. The second highest risk genetically are Iranian,
Okay.
right? Now, Israel should be on that list. If I've just said that the countries with nuclear, right,
But they're
are
not because they're K26R gene.
correct. So they land up, because this is Neanderthal, this all comes down to Neanderthal genes. And once again, like if you're looking at the pathway here,
Mhm.
if you're understanding that these sequences, right, there's one main backbone, and then there's Barrick sequence, which we call Barrick sequence, but it's actually not Barrick sequence. It's Moderna's sequence. Moderna's sequence is the reason for the furin cleavage site. It's
Mhm.
what people read for me on X when I talk about the 19 nucleotide kill switch. Okay, if you have the main backbone, all the other pieces to that sequence, it can't do much in the human body because it needs to get activated with furin. And so the reason that there's a furin cleavage site put in there is that you need to keep it dormant, and then it needs to be activated by furin. Now, the entire piece of it, though, all came from that batshit. The whole thing. You didn't have to make any of this.
Right.
It's all found. The entire thing is found within that cave. So Moderna, in my opinion, and Moderna can at any time can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. Okay,
Right.
haven't heard from them yet, but they the reason that we'll never really hear about how much involvement the Wuhan Institute of Virology had and how much involvement Barrick had is that they were all working together and they were sharing that information with Moderna. This is where it gets ugly. And it gets even uglier because they're not just sharing it with any random company. This is not trade secrets that, when China steals a product and then they re-engineer it over there. They are sharing bioweapon information with a commercial company that has military contracts. So Moderna was the company that got the military contract to build our bioweapon.
Right.
Moderna. That 19 nucleotide sequence happens to be in SARS-CoV-2 as a perfect match in reverse.
Right.
Okay. So there was a Frontier paper, I think it was 2022, and they said, how did this 19 nucleotide sequence, why is this here? This is really weird. It has a furin cleavage site. It's right by the spike protein, meaning that if it's like an arrow, meaning that it opens up, right? This is the part that allows it for replication. How did this, why is that in there? More importantly, for me, it's like opening up a product, not knowing its brand, digging around in it and finding a logo. Then I'm like, oh, okay, this is Apple built this, BMW built this. This is a product that's made by Mercedes because you found the logo in there. So essentially that piece, that 19 nucleotide sequence that was found there is a collaborative effort that then Moderna starts using in clinical trials for cancer, for their mRNA. And the reason that you need it, and this is where it gets really, really ugly, and this is where products like mine, why I'm focusing on not just understanding origins, I'm focusing on saving humanity. And that for a human being, right? For somebody who's I'm just a regular guy, okay? Even to me, that sounds crazy, right? But if I understand that 19 nucleotide sequence has been put into all of us, because this is not just a vaccinated, unvaccinated. You have a transmissible, these are transmissible sequences. Part of that is prion. Part of the spike protein is a prion, right? And prions don't need replication, right? Prions are like our example from human beings is anything that's come out of social psychology that shows how easy it is to manipulate people by getting a few people to do something. It's very easy. There's a great video people can look at, a study that was done where they basically get somebody in a waiting room and they give this person instructions. This person's working with them and they give them instructions that when they hear a buzzer, they'll stand up just randomly, right? So they hear the buzzer and this person stands up and then they sit down, okay? Then the buzzer goes off again, the person stands up. As soon as a second person does it, you'll have a third person stand up for no reason because the buzzer's going off.
Right.
Then you can eventually take the person away that was part of your experiment and you've trained the entire group.
Correct.
Right. So that's how prion works. Prion is really ugly in terms of disease because it does not need replication. What happens is the proteins start mimicking each other. One misfolds, another protein says that kind of, I'm talking like everyone else when they talk about proteins with brains. It's not that they think, oh, that looks cool. What happens is structurally, they just start mimicking that structure. So it spreads through a process that's different from replication. It spreads through mimicry. And that's also why it's very, very difficult to stop. Because once you have these proteins misfolding and it's like dominoes, they're falling. So
is that what's happened to America? Because it seems to me that when I travel a lot, Dr. Braun, that I see people sort of moving through life really sort of vacant.
Yes.
I mean, airplanes, people used to stand up, get their luggage and like get off. Now people are like, oh, it's just people don't move. They don't have a sense of like, hey, we're alive. We're moving, going somewhere. They're just sort of sludging through life.
So
Is that what's going
that's a
on?
perfect way for me to answer part of that question when you said, how is my work different from others or from mainstream or even within our own, health
Right.
freedom community? And it's
Right.
different because I've only looked at this as a bioweapon from the beginning,
Yep.
and I've
Yep.
only looked at the various mechanisms that it's doing. And so one of the things that it does over here, and this is where the venom comes in, is
Mhm.
that it is very similar to a known biological agent called VX. And VX is something that triggers nicotinic receptors and muscarinic receptors, and it's the how it can be used is it can be lethal. You can switch somebody off with it, but it can be
Mhm.
used in sublethal doses to create that, what you just described, that we're all seeing, that
Mhm.
incapacitated state. The,
Yeah.
the the old videos that I looked at from back in the day when they were first researching it, what they would do is they would expose somebody to VX, a soldier, a very, very low amount. You're talking about like tiny, like just a few atomic particles. And what
Yep.
would happen is that they would give them instructions that if enemy, right? So this is a simulated exercise. They would give them instructions that if an enemy approaches them, they need to radio through, and they need to tell headquarters that there's an enemy here. Okay. Once you're exposed to that VX, you don't call in.
Wow.
Okay, you're incapacitated, and
Yep.
it's not that you are
It,
asleep. You're in a dreamlike state. You're in a slow down state.
yeah.
You're apathetic. You can be more manipulated, right? You can be controlled in that way because your neurotransmitters have been suppressed. And so that's another aspect that makes my work different, because I actually named the spike protein. I named it Agent SVX. After the original venomous Agent X, I just put an S on it because it's spike protein VX, and
Mhm.
it that's one aspect. But the 19 nucleotide kill switch works like this: if you are all of us have been exposed to this 19 nucleotide sequence. If that
Mhm.
19 nucleotide sequence is taken up in biofilm in the body, then basically what is going to happen with it is that it gets activated by very, very high levels of stress, survival like stress. So
Mhm.
radiation, 6G, 5G is already doing it, but 6G will absolutely activate this thing, because what it will do is it will tell the fungi and bacteria that it's about to die. And this is it gives a really ancient signal. It gives a fungi and bacterial this ancient signal of it's now or never, right? It's that final sprint that you can see out of an athlete. It's that
Mhm.
it's that final moment that somebody, when we talk about the words push through.
Does your adrenals get taxed during this phase?
So an interesting thing about the way that this works is that your adrenals go up, and that's what increases the clotting, right? So if you think about how venom has two main functions. Venom is to control the prey, and then it's to activate all the systems in the prey's body so that the prey decomposes itself.
Yeah.
So if a creature that's getting eaten alive, it has to stay the metabolism of that creature has to stay on for long enough so that it can digest itself. But there's an emergency function that if that prey is being eaten alive and it starts biting or scratching, or it gets this adrenaline rush, the fight flight response, then the kill switch activates in the prey, because now it needs that prey to immediately shut down
Yep.
survival instinct. And it does that mostly through hypoxia. In other words, through taking away oxygen from the brain. So
Sure.
so the increased adrenaline and something called catecholamines is the reason that you also see the athletes, right? So when we saw that time period during the rollout where we're having athletes dropping dead that
Sure.
are perfectly healthy and fit, it's because there was there was high loads of spike protein plus that increased burst, and then they're either going to get a clot or they're going to just switch off, right? So
Right.
that's where the heart issues were coming from.
So Dr. Zelenko talked about prophylaxis with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. In terms of treatment, the antibiotic response in some patients, like Bartonella, Lyme, fungal involvement, all this stuff. Where do you see? Was that a valid prescription? I should say, the hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, because I mean, I know people that took it and had a great response.
So anything that's going to lower inflammation,
yep,
right, is gonna have benefit. The biggest aspect of Zelenko's protocol, where he was spot on, and that I want to add to, is that zinc becomes crucial. But I actually contacted Zelenko, and we went back and forward, and my message with him. But unfortunately, at the time, I think he was getting treatment in Europe, and so we never landed up actually talking. But the thing that I wanted Zelenko to talk about is you cannot take zinc without copper. And
it's like vitamin K and vitamin D and K. Same thing.
There is a substance in the body that's make it or break it with spike protein, and it's called SOD1. Okay, it's a superoxidized dismutase is its fancy term. It's called SOD1, and it is a compound in the body that the body builds to fight high levels of oxidative stress, and it's made with copper and zinc and sulfur. And so when you are taking zinc without copper, you land up throwing off the ratio. And if you're taking copper without zinc, you land up throwing off that ratio.
Got it.
Most people currently are actually copper deficient. And there's two main reasons for that. It gets very complicated because copper is involved in prion. So the body is actually trying to stop prion from killing people. And so it's actually depleting the body purposefully on copper.
Interesting.
Okay. But the minute you deplete the body from copper to try and stop prion or amyloids, now you're going to land up with a whole other range of a disease profile, because copper deficiency is pretty much most symptoms that anyone would describe as disease is related to copper deficiency. So you've got this really, really complicated dysregulation with copper. You have to be able to bring back copper levels safely to the body. The only way to do that is also to bring down the iron levels that are high from oxidative, causing the oxidative stress. And you've got to make sure that you've got adequate zinc. So that's one of the main drivers of the pathology here. And so it becomes crucial to and so there's a couple of safe ways beyond the supplements, but one of them is copper-rich foods. So I've got a whole protocol, by the way, called Rewilding, that's food-based, and it's a integrated protocol. There is not one thing that someone's going to do to make sure that they recover. It's free on my Substack. And it includes foods, and it also includes everything that we've spoken about that helps to switch off these circuits. So, for example, sunlight becomes really important. This is why they want to dim the sun, right? We've actually just started a range right now. They're moving forward with a lot of proposals currently in terms of geoengineering that involves sun dimming. So that's another reason that people are getting sick right now. That's the other reason for the made up cicada word that this 19 nucleotide sequence is currently being activated. It gets activated through EMF. And so what people need to do, and what you said about the protocol, is that yes, these things are good and they're useful short term, but they're not a long-term solution. And the same way as antibiotics have been shown to help certain long COVID people, in other people, it makes the whole situation completely worse. And when I say long COVID, I'm predominantly talking about vaccine injury.
Mhm.
I know we jumped ahead and you asked me about, how I differ in terms of theory. There are still unknowns for me in 2020. There's still a lot of unknowns in terms of what we are dealing with. This entire thing could have been done with the bat guano, and it could have been just literally aerosolized. And President Trump has used the word dust a couple of times in interviews lately, where
Hmm.
we stopped talking about Wuhan flu and he stopped talking about virus. And in a couple of interviews, he actually talks about, dust. He talks about the dust that came in from the wind, right? So this can actually be done in that way.
Is somebody advising him based on what you're talking about, perhaps? I mean,
I think
are you
what
speaking to somebody in his orbit that perhaps is
what
giving him this information?
what happens in the world of threat assessment and threat management, and the bulk of the work on the preventive side requires looking for what in my industry they call leakage in terms of information.
Mhm.
I don't use the word leakage. I use the word publicize. Over time, information has a way of spilling out. So, for
Yep.
example, during the pandemic at the beginning, President Biden referred to the Neanderthals of Texans that weren't taking things seriously. It wasn't a coincidence they used the word Neanderthal, because this all relates to the spike protein relates to Neanderthal genes. So he's saying things, right? Whether it was him or not him or whoever
Right. We
whoever
don't know.
it is at this point, he's saying things that have crept out during closed doors discussions, during briefings, that things that people are they're not on their teleprompt, they're not in their notes, but over time, especially when people go off script, information starts being leaked out or publicized. And I think that what happened with Trump is that in those interviews, he's moving away from the lie. He's moving away from the lie that this SARS-CoV-2 is this novel virus, when it's actually sequences that have
Mhm.
been purified or used directly from the bat guano. And I've got very, very, for me, I think that my biggest issue is that I find it hard to believe that President Trump is not aware of the full scope of this situation. I'm not somebody that politicizes anything. I don't have a party. I'm not affiliated in that way. And so for me, what I'm mostly interested is I want to bring out the facts, and I don't want to justify the reasons why someone may or may not be doing something when I don't have the information or I can't read their mind, right? But I think that what is deeply troubling about where we at is that mRNA is still on the market.
Yes, it
We not
is.
only have COVID vaccines, everyone always talks about the COVID vaccines and the shedding. RSV, there's currently on the market, there's RSV mRNA vaccines. So
Yeah.
does it surprise anybody that there's an uptick in RSV, or somebody has a baby, a 6-month-old baby that suddenly has RSV, and they don't connect the dots that baby just recently spent time with the grandparents, and the grandparents recently just got their RSV vaccine. That's an mRNA. I mean, so mRNA is an existential threat to the planet. But
Mhm.
to me, that's also where I potentially differ from mainstream. That intentional bioweapon component is that the bioweapon is primarily an incapacitating tool. In other words, it dulls people down. But the main reason that we even having this discussion, and the main reason this happened, is it's depopulation, right? So
Yes.
when they tell you what they're going to do, and they
Believe
tell
them.
you that they're going to get down to 500 million people, you got to believe
Yep.
them. You got to believe that that's the goal, and
Yep.
that we're on that trajectory.
Yep.
This is a controlled culling, just like a farmer would do, just like they do in a game reserve somewhere.
So I want to ask you this question because Dr. Eads is asking about reversing the PrEP Act. I've heard Dr. Jane Ruby talk about it. I've read, when I look at U.S. codes, I know it's nothing but a superficial overlay to our Constitution. So it's a corporation of public-private partnerships of for-profit agencies and for-profit corporations public or private, that are doing this to us. We have
Right.
lost the control of we the people. We have given up our republic is still there. We can still assume those offices, but we don't because we think the government's running, quote, just fine. It's not running fine. It's running amok. And as Christie says, depopulation is in full force. So, in terms of reversing the PrEP Act, is that something that you think we need to, massively get behind as a
Absolutely.
beginning? Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that ultimately the pathway to all of this starts from 2001 onwards, from the towers being brought down,
Yeah. The Patriot Act.
and
Yeah.
and everything comes after that, and then basically the piece that we didn't speak about that ties us all together is that to do this and to connect military action to commercial enterprises and to science and institutions, you need a connector, and that connector was Epstein, right? So
Yeah.
you couldn't do the pandemic without Epstein, and
That's
so Epstein is the Epstein files and those documents, even down to the point where you can start seeing some of the work that I was talking about today in terms of he was doing a conference with the world's specialists in olfactory systems. He had a smell group formed, a cohort of people that are the world's experts in triggering the body in terms of things like pheromones, in terms of triggering the vagal nerve, which controls essentially the whole body. So even down to the point of how do you build this thing, and who do you involve, and how do you get these institutions to go along with it, and how do you get the science to merge? He was the connector point. I don't believe he was the mastermind to it. I look at him as a person who was able to build the communication and social network in pieces, so that not actually everybody, very, very few people would be aware of the entire plan. They would all have their little sections that they're working on, but
Sure.
the entirety of this would be military level. It would be some people at the CIA, which is why the CIA was involved in Wuhan when the pandemic came out. COVID-19, for me, I know a lot of people have got a lot of theories on where that word comes from. In CIA terms, the word COVID is a shortening for cover identity. That's what if you wanted to write cover identity in CIA terms, it would be the first few letters of what we know as COVID-19, and then the 19 is not the year. The 19 is the 19 nucleotide kill switch,
sequence. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Without that, you've got nothing. You've got whether somebody wants to call it a virus, someone wants to call it a prompt, if somebody wants to call it strings of protein or amino acids together. Without that, you do not have the ability to do those three circuits to the human body. You need the 19 nucleotide kill switch, which is where that 19 comes from. Last piece to it, as I feel like we have to wrap up. Is there any other questions? And then I'll end on a bombshell, because I'm currently
no, go ahead and end on a bombshell, because this has been absolutely fantastic. It's been really just such an incredible you've imparted so much fantastic information. I think, having a doctor sitting in here who is extremely busy and listening to every word you're saying, she's thrilled. And she even says 19 equals AI. And I've seen this, COVID, AI, all this stuff, artificial intelligence. And they do want to believe, they want to blend us into a human hybrid. That's why they're leaking all this alien, interbreeding, whatever. Who knows if it's real? What am I going to do about it if it is? It's kind of like, shut up already. Let's get back to saving our country.
It is all connected, right? So the AI and the robotics, and I write about this all the time, right? So we have, if you're going towards a goal of 500 million people, right? And I'm currently working in a very similar way to what I think the Bible references in terms of like a Noah-like thinking, right? Like an ark. You can't take everybody, right? And so for me, I think the work and the urgency of the work that I'm doing is this understanding that if their goal is 500 million, let's push it to 1 million, right? Let's try and save 500 million people of our own. Let's have what every sci-fi movie shows. Let's Hunger Games, whatever it is. The resistance in Aldous Huxley's book Brave New World, you have the people that lived on the reserve, the savages. I'm trying to save us savages, the untamable, the undomesticated, the people that are spiritual, the people that connect to nature, the people that we can use AI, and robots could be cool, but we certainly don't want them replacing us. And we certainly we still have morality and ethics, and that's the difference between us and the people leading this. So however somebody defines it by name, what you've got is that you've got data from 2020 to show that there was, at the beginning at least, no real threat of any novel virus. You potentially have this prion-like sequence being used in mRNA, and all of it gets way overcomplicated, as I said. But I'm going to leave your audience with this. If you want the rest of the sequence, besides Barrick's piece, it was already found. Okay. There is somebody called Steve Massey, and Steve Massey wrote a paper. I'm going to forget the year right now. It might have been 2023. Steve Massey's paper looks at what they call a virus, which I'm just going to call a prompted sequence. I'm fine with calling it a virus if that's what a virus is. He found a sequence. Well, he didn't find the sequence. The closest match to what they'll call a novel virus is a virus that they call rat. Now I'm drawing a blank. It's rat 13G. Okay, rat 13G is what they said is the closest match to the rest of the sequence, except the 19 nucleotide sequence. Okay, so where would they find rat? This is where it gets really gross, really weird, and also simplifies everything that I just described.
Okay.
Where would you find this? Okay, coincidentally, it comes from that copper mine that I discussed. That's where they found rat G13. And it's from horseshoe bats. But this is where it gets weird. It's not that when they normally find these prompts, these things that they call viruses, they normally find them in shit, in feces. They normally take a fecal sample, and they take it from they say the bat guano. In one of their samples that they took from the bat guano, they found a sequence that came from something that is a vaginal plug.
What?
It's called a copulatory plug. Okay.
Okay.
I didn't have your attention before. I've certainly got your attention now. Okay. What bats have to do, right? Because they hibernate and they have to get through the winter. Sperm enters the female bat.
Mm-hmm.
That sperm needs to be stored in a deactivated state, and it needs to make it through winter in the female's body.
Okay.
Rat G13 is a sequence that gets the bat to build a mucus plug that holds foreign proteins in her body in a suspended animation state.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In the body, right? Until hibernation is over. So, COVID, when I said it's hibernation, envenomation, and pregnancy immune tolerance, is because that sequence is what's being triggered in us.
Okay.
Okay. So, right from the beginning, what was really interesting when I first looked at the sequence, there was something reminding me of the reproductory system. There was something about that spike protein that kept making me think this is sperm-like. I even described it in a post once where I said, Spike is not your friend. They're trying to tell you that Spike is your friend. Spike's like a little dick. It actually, the way that they built it with that furin cleavage site, it actually goes up and down. And there was something very phallic about this, and I couldn't work it out.
That's
until
part of the course with these people.
Until recently, where I realized that the sequence that they're using and the sequence, yes, we have them in human beings too. So the sequence that they use, this rat G13, plus the Moderna, NIH, BARDA, 19 nucleotide sequence that also comes from that state bat guano that Barrick put in there. They are triggering those hijacked circuits because the body is storing a foreign protein. Okay, it's tagging it as safe because the galectin is on there. And it is also creating this really weird, because it's not just mucus, it's a complete system where this plug has to plug and hold that semen in there until it starts shrinking down in size. It will release the semen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it will then impregnate the bat, and the mucus plug will fall out. That is SARS-CoV-2. Nothing novel about it. Nothing about it. Rat G13.
No, nothing new under the sun, Dr. Braun. Nothing new.
That's it. Nothing new. That's all it is.
Just repurpose what we have and
sequence from the bat cave.
Yeah, effectively weaponize nature.
Absolutely.
Which is what they've
done.
That
same dust, blow it, gets into somebody's nose.
So when Rand Paul is railing Dr. Fauci for theater in Congress or in the Senate hearings, and Fauci, they claim he's lying. He's lying because he had nothing to do with weaponizing this COVID, this virus. Was that just theater?
It's not theater because Fauci's deeply involved and he's the gatekeeper for it, and he controlled the money for bioweapons. Yeah. So he knows all of this, and it includes all of the work that was done on HIV. There's the HIV sequences in there. It includes like the doctor saying all the stuff about the lipid nanoparticles, all of it to get it to work. Fauci is like the Epstein in terms of the controlling piece to the government money to build a US-made bioweapon that has genetic risk for our enemies.
Yeah.
Right? But is impacting all of us, because right now, and this is what I'll close with, it's easy for people when you reach a point where you're not compassionate for your enemy, right? You become a psychopath, and then at any point you are the enemy to your own kind. Now, that's not to say that sometimes war and violence isn't, it has to happen. Defending someone's self has to happen. But we as human beings, we have an element of empathy. We have an element of understanding. We have an element that we try not to take more than we have to, right? And so people can be like, oh, that was great. The US built this thing that can kill, Iranians and other foreign enemies of ours. Yeah, that's until they turn it on us, because that nucleotide sequence, it impacts all people. And eventually we are the enemy, because we're the enemy of the state, because the state has got a mandate. And this is something also that caught my attention recently with words, because I listened to words very, very carefully. In an interview that I recently pulled up and listened to, President Trump, I'll paraphrase slightly, but he said something like, I was given a mandate of 6 months for Operation Warp Speed, and I got it done. And immediately in my thought was, a mandate by who? You're the commander of chief. That's your project.
That's right.
Who's your boss? That's what I would, if the biggest question anybody in the world should be asking right now, who are you working for?
Well, that question is being asked right now because people don't understand a lot of the stuff that's going on. And so they're asking the question, who is he working for? Some people say it's Israel. So I don't know. We're going to find out one way or the other.
We certainly have to.
He works for us. He's supposed to work for us, Dr. Braun. That's,
What I want to say.
It is a military operation. Dr. Eads is correct. This, the military was behind this. They used manufacturers to put a label on it, right?
Oh,
but
it
was a military operation. So
Moderna, from a military perspective, Moderna was the front runner, and Moderna did the clinical trial to see if this would work on cancer patients. Then they did Zika.
Yeah.
Right. And they had and then basically all the contractors were given deadlines to see whether they could be operational. And people must remember that what they called the pandemic, they called it a live exercise.
Right.
They called it a live exercise. I've got to run, but I've absolutely thank you. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Dr. Braun. It's been a fascinating conversation. A best place for people to go and see everything is probably on your website.
Yes, drtalbraun.com. This is copperine.com, COPPERINE.com. And yeah, they can find me on social media. And I look forward to more.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you, Ann.
Take
Bye now.
care. Bye-bye. Wow, that was really fascinating. As Christy said, I didn't see that on my bingo card. Richard Marks, thanks for popping in. And yeah, Dr. Eads, he is a great guest. I definitely want to get back with him and do more. I'm actually running into an interesting situation. I didn't realize this interview would go as long as it did. Glad it did, but I have another one at 1 o'clock. So what I'm going to do is I've got another great guest coming on at 1 o'clock, and I want to just sort of give a little bit of a buffer to kind of reset everything. If you guys want to hang tight, I've got Eddie Spear up next. He is actually running in Florida's 16th district for Congress. What's interesting about Eddie is, well, a number of things, and you're going to get to know him, but he's running against somebody who hasn't actually put their name in the ring yet. And this other somebody is the wife of the chair for the RNC. Joe Gruters is the RNC chair. His wife, Sydney, has considered and tossed her name around as perhaps she would run for Congress. Which that's interesting. And President Trump has actually already gone ahead and suggested that she should do it. We've seen a few endorsements from this president that just don't make sense. Lindsey Graham, for instance, we'll start there. And I think that Eddie Spear is somebody that we really want to take a look at. I live here in Florida. I'm gravely concerned about what's going on. We had an opportunity to get a great bill through recently that just, didn't make it out of committee. And it was really to address homeowners associations. And frankly, we should, as people here, should be able to fire and get rid of and just eliminate our HOA and maybe turn it into a private member association. Because I live amongst a bunch of crazy people that want to, go after you for every little thing. It makes no sense. And it becomes a power trip, as you know. I know I'm digressing, but just stick with me. I'm going to put you guys over here for a little bit, let you enjoy some information that I like to share while I go and track down my guest, because I think he's sitting in another green room and I'm not going to cut the live feed because why? So hang on 1 second. I will be right back. Let's see here. Let's give you a little bit of a reminder of why the IRS is a fraud. One of my personal favorites.
There is no law, and to date, nobody has been able to show that there is a law for the average American citizen working day in and day out to pay an income tax.
But We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education put a full-page ad in the USA Today on July 7th, 2000. And within the body of that ad was a $50,000 challenge for anyone that could show the law. And to me, $50,000 is a lot of money. So I went after that and did the research based on the fact that I thought, let's put this baby to bed. I'm hearing all these rumors. I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'll answer these people's questions that are asking me, and then I'll win this $50,000. And, based on the research that I did throughout the year 2000 and that I'm still doing, I have not found that law. I've asked Congress. We've asked a lot of people in the IRS commissioners, helpers. They can't answer, because if they answer, the American people are going to know that this whole thing is a fraud.
There is no law. There is no law that requires the average American worker in the private sector to pay a direct unapportioned tax on their labor and compensation for services. There is no law.
I really expected that, of course there's a law that you can point to in the law book, the code that requires you to file a tax return. Of course there is. Maybe I don't know what it is right then as he was speaking to me, but sure. So naively, I agreed to go off and research it and get back to him. 3.5 months later, I was at that point where I couldn't find the statute that clearly made a person liable, at least not me and most people I know, and I had no choice in my mind except to resign.
I had to leave the IRS because I presented evidence that I had accumulated indicating that the agency was violating the law and violating people's rights. And I asked the agency for a response to my sincere concerns. And the answer I got was that they would not respond to my concerns and that they would provide me with the paperwork necessary to tender my resignation.
You can look through the statutes and look for the law that requires you to pay. And when you do that, you can't identify a law that requires the average person in America who earns a wage and works in private business to pay an income tax.
American citizens, along with the foundation, have been asking the IRS to specifically provide them with the underlying legal foundation upon which they administer and enforce the personal income tax laws in our country.
At the national level, when people would attempt to contact somebody of a much higher authority, say the commissioner, same kind of thing. They would get answers that were in effect answers.
You have to understand that an agency which will unlawfully impose a tax that doesn't exist is not going to care. If we, the people, don't know what our rights are, they're not going to tell us.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. All individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government. People have been told, that you need this income tax system to fund government, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, my question is, well, if that's true, how did we fund government from 1776 to 1913?
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
And a lot of people might say, well, gee, if there wasn't an income tax, what would happen to education? They don't understand that education is paid for the most part, out of state and local taxes, your property tax. People might say, well, how are we going to build and maintain our highways? If there's no money coming into the government, we need our highways. There is a tax on every gallon of gasoline that people buy. Proceeds from the income tax do not pay for highway construction.
I believe that in both spirit and substance, our tax system has come to be un-American. Death and taxes may be inevitable, but unjust taxes are not.
This small booklet includes the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. This is a document that every citizen should read. It's a document which freed an entire nation. This is the Internal Revenue Code, and this document, and the unlawful application of this document by the Internal Revenue Service has enslaved the nation that this document attempted to free.
Well, there you go, folks. Thanks for sticking with me. But I have to remind everybody that the IRS is just a massively corrupt organization. Title 26, it's like all the U.S. codes. They are for them. They are for those that live in Washington, D.C. and operate under their own legislative democracy. As I've said many times, Nancy Pelosi will say, we are a threat to their democracy. Well, she's not lying. She might be lying about a lot of other things, but she's telling the gosh darn truth that, we are Americans, we are free, we are citizens of our own states, and we stand on a constitutional republic. And that constitution is to protect us from the ogres and the tyranny coming out of a legislative democracy in Washington, D.C., which is why I want to shift gears here. And I appreciate our next guest who's working with me. I was going to do 2 separate shows, but because the first show ran into such incredible information, I didn't want to cut it. And we've got an audience, so let's keep it going, because we're talking about, the midterms, and President Trump signed an executive order yesterday because Congress wouldn't move. We couldn't get a SAVE Act passed. Apparently nobody in Congress wants to make sure we have Americans voting. They don't want to clean up our voter rolls. They don't want to have, a standardized voting for one day for federal elections, this whole nonsense. The machines, we still haven't dealt with that. I mean, the list goes on. And thanks to all the patriots out there, all the thousands of people that did the election integrity footwork to understand, comprehend, and bring forth the evidence, all the ways that we've been getting screwed and our elections stolen. And there's been some real heroes in the movement. A good friend of mine, Patrick Braun, for one, has traveled all over the world looking at that problem and has brought people together. And then, of course, there's just teams in Florida, the teams all over the place. So let's talk about some of the congressional races, because to me, here in Florida, it's just because we have a member of someone running for Congress in your state doesn't mean it doesn't impact the rest of the nation. I think we can all understand that these elections matter. One senator matters to the rest of the country. So when you talk about congressional races, you can't just say, oh, this is just another congressional race, I should say, because what I'm talking about here in Florida is actually a test case for the future of the America First movement. Remember MAGA? MAGA seems to sort of have faded into the distance. There are people that still believe in it, but we don't see it getting exercised. We need to put America first. And this is what President Trump ran on. And what we're seeing right now is in Florida's 16th district is something that really should concern every single one of you that is paying attention. So on one side, you have a man who's built something. He's built a business, a school, a movement. He's a man who stood up during COVID. He's a man who challenged the indoctrination in education. And we just went through the whole COVID in the previous segment. We've also got this man who's already took on the establishment, and he actually pulled 40% of the vote without the machine behind him. And on the other side, well, you have a candidate who hasn't even formally filed yet. but already has the weight of the RNC apparatus. And again, I am not a big RNC. I don't even go to CPAC anymore. I think the whole thing is full of rhinos and it's corrupt. But this individual also has a Trump-aligned endorsement pipeline behind her. So let's be honest about what this looks like, right? We have been fighting, and Tina Peters is sitting in prison. She did a movie called The Selection Code, selection with an S. And so this, to me, kind of looks like what we're dealing with. It's selection. We don't really have elections anymore. This is looking more like nepotism when you have the chairman of the RNC's wife talking about running, and then you get an endorsement, saying, oh, it'd be a great idea from the president. This isn't an opportunity to really represent us. This is the same system that you and I have been fighting, but we're just sort of wearing, I guess, a different uniform than the other guys. I don't know what's really going on here. So we're going to talk about this tension. We're going to still ask questions like, can you call it America first? Because if grassroots candidates are being sidelined for someone connected to a party leadership position like Sidney Gruters and her husband, Joe, what are we looking at here? Or is this maybe, I don't know, something exactly where we have a moment that we separate the movement from the machine? Are we able to actually say, you know what, we're going to stand up against rhinos, the Rhino Pack, the RNC? It's not because we disagree with all the values, but because they have become their own tyranny. So this is why I wanted to bring on this guest today, because Eddie Spear isn't running to be managed. He's running to challenge the system itself. And I think that's why this conversation matters. So who is Eddie Spears? Well, let's talk about him, because he's a Christian, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a grandfather, he's an entrepreneur. He built and sold software company. He founded Inspiration Academy, which is a private Christian school. He's not a politician, and he got called into this fight. Let me bring Eddie on now. Eddie, it is great to have you here. Thank you so much for your time today, and I apologize for making you wait.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate listening to you and how you brilliantly elaborate and describe the situation that we're in against the establishment, against the corruption of the rhinos and their entire apparatus that's working diligently against us. And they're the ones that have all the money. They're the ones that have everything, all the machine and the mechanisms to silence we the people. And that's what they've done here in Manatee County. And my race is a perfect example. You couldn't have a clearer description or a clearer battle lines drawn between we the people and the actual conservative movement that is America first versus the establishment. And so, yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, sure. So I found your story very compelling, and I know some of the folks in which you run with, and these are some of the best, I think, the best of the best when it comes to election integrity. But you actually did take on the establishment. We're going to get to your current race, but in a prior race, you actually got 40% of the vote versus the incumbent. Yeah. Talk to me about what you did in that race that got you actually to, from nowhere to a pretty good showing.
I would say just speaking the truth, and it resonates. Now, what the truth is, a lot of people don't know. So there was a large amount of education that we did to tie in the political consultants, their dark money, and a big issue here in Florida is just the corruption around overdevelopment of Florida. And so there's a lot of developers who are working with these consultants, and I started naming names. Now, before when I started running, nobody would name any names. They're like, that's verboten. You can't say those things. You can't call people out. That didn't make any sense, and it's just not in my nature. So I had to call out the bully in the room that was trying to dictate everything. So there was a monopoly in Manatee County of Anthony Pedicini and Simwins. Now, please remember, it's a complicated story, but Simwins is Anthony Pedicini and Tom Piccolo. Now, those two run Simwins, and it's a corrupt organization that is bringing in all the money and putting these rhinos in positions of power to fold when they ask them to fold on important issues. But Tom Piccolo is married to Josie Tomkow, who just lost the special election. She just lost the special election, even though there were 10% more Republicans. There was a 10% advantage in this election who showed out to vote. Yet she still lost against a Democrat. The reason why she lost is you can't continue to bash the America First movement and expect them to come out and vote for a Republican when it's the same Republican that's doing the bashing and the silencing and the lying and the cheating. So it's no wonder that the Republicans lost in those 2 special elections. It's because the machine has been used to silence the grassroots movement.
Let's refresh my audience. I have interviewed some folks on what's happened here, but walk us through at a high level how the Republican Party of Florida, the RPOF, is silencing these. We have 67 counties in Florida and 67 Republican executive committees, RECs. And they are all, when you become a chair of an REC or president, whatever they call it, you were elected. These are all elected positions by the people of the county. What is the Republican Party of Florida doing to these RECs right now?
Well, they will agree with you and everything goes along fine as long as you don't call out the corruption and as long as you hold their feet to the fire as far as the America First movement and allow debate and a discussion within these groups. So these are the thought leaders within the conservative movement within the Republican Party. So when I started calling them out, they basically just shut down the meetings because everybody was like, wow, this is why we keep losing. Why do we keep losing, electing Republicans and then losing the battle and losing the principled votes? And so we would call them out and they just shut down and stopped having meetings. And then after that, they prevented us from electing our own leader. So we had a leader that was shutting us down. So we said, okay, what we got to do here is now kick this leader out. They wouldn't allow us to do that. And they said, this is the leader that's been chosen. You have to work with them. And then we couldn't work within the REC, but we still wanted to get out the vote and get the message out. So there was groups called the Republican Assembly, Republican Liberty Caucus, because we couldn't work within the REC. Right. So then the Republican Party, Joe Gruder's Evan Power, outlawed the word Republican and said, you cannot have a Republican assembly because you're using the word Republican. So that just delayed everything and caused a bunch of lawfare. So that's some of the things they did. The other thing that they did is they wouldn't allow anybody to be endorsed out of these groups. So there's some decent reasons for that, but I ended up doing straw polls. So I would just take my camera and said, how many people are voting for the establishment candidate versus how many people are voting for me? After having a debate, having a discussion, and educating the voters, 90+% would vote for me, and I clearly dominated in the straw polls. And then the Republican Party outlawed straw polls. They said you can't do that anymore. So, are you kidding me? And then after that, we broke the monopoly here in Manatee County. So despite all their efforts, we broke the monopoly and they didn't win all the seats that they had been vying for the way they had the previous election cycles.
Right.
So then we won state committee man and state committee woman within the Republican Party. This is a county-wide election on the ballot. Every voter in Manatee County voted for these two and they won. Then the Republican Party of Florida said, we don't care. We're a private organization. We don't care about the election and you're out. They just kicked 2 state committee men and women off because for retribution against going against the machine. So now you'd think to yourself, okay, that's really bad. Is this really happening? This should be through the news and everybody should be screaming and yelling about this, but they have the news in their pocket. Nobody's talking about it. And then to make matters worse, because the Republican Liberty Caucus and everybody was said, I was going to run for REC. I want to fix this. I want to create and galvanize the grassroots momentum that we have. So I said I was going to run for REC chair. Then what they did is they shut down the entire REC. 180 people who want to be active in politics and push conservative values, they said, you're done, you're out.
Right.
And they selected like 5 people. And that's all they've been able to get, from what I can tell, about 5, maybe 15 people that look like the REC. And they will then have fake voter guides through Joe Gruder's. He did this before, and somebody else by the name of Jennings DePriest. So the next wave is coming, and so our job is to make sure that people know what America First is, who is actually America First, and who's a part of the rhino establishment corruption that's happening here in Florida to a devastating impact. It's so devastating that Joe Gruder's, we're looking at a blue wave right now, and this is entirely Joe Gruder's fault because they have just completely silenced the America First movement. The real strength behind these conservative causes.
Yeah, Christy remembers when it happened. She said it was awful what the RNC did. Joe Gruters, who was a national committeeman with the RPOF, is now the national chair for the RNC. And his wife is the lady who is considering throwing her hat in the ring to run for the 16th district, which is where you are currently running and have your paperwork filed. You are a real candidate. I know some good people that are, political operatives in the state of Florida that have spoken very highly of you. Anna Marie Delgado was like, two thumbs up for Eddie Spear.
Good.
Eddie, I want to, because this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, is the Constitution, right? And the fact that our creator's name is invoked 4 times in our founding fathers document. The Constitution, when it was drafted, I mean, we just, basically overthrown a Whig and Tory system. We wanted no more part of that. We didn't even have, parties and systems in this. This is literally about protecting us, our God-given rights. Talk to us about the Constitution under God and juxtapose that against party loyalty. Where are we going wrong?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. First, the Bible, best documents, and you gotta give credit to England here, the Magna Carta, which describes the what we have and gave us rights, so we the people can govern ourselves. It's a system of self-government, and it requires the consent of the governed. Correct. And when there's a long train of abuses, which evinces a design of tyranny, it is our right and our duty to throw off such government. Now, those are dangerous words, but that's what we're living. We're living in a revolution against corrupt government. And that's what the experiment is. And that's why I love the Constitution so much. We don't need to ask permission. We have the Constitution. That is the final law of the land. And so we need people that understand that to step up and say, no, I'm a free sovereign citizen, and this is my right as much as it is anybody else's. And in fact, we're going to step up and throw off political party and the political bonds that had held us together. We need to throw off everything that's happening within the Republican Party and recapture the leadership so that they cannot continue to force patronage to crooks and crooked candidates that like they have. So the Constitution is where it all starts from, and that's that everything needs to be mapped back to that. Now that's incredibly difficult to do because we've got a filled with government that's filled with bureaucracies and lies that are now part of the norm. So it's going to take a while to peel these things back and understand the freedoms that were enshrined in our Constitution.
And this all starts with education, because really they don't teach civics anymore. They teach statutory law and administrative law in law school. They don't teach constitutional law. I think it's an elective in most law schools. So we are so far behind the curve when it comes to our institutional knowledge. And therefore, educational warfare is real. They have targeted us. We have the stupid Department of Education, which really is the Department of Indoctrination, that I thought we would have abolished by now. But here we are, April of the second year of the Trump administration. We still have somebody on the payroll, to which I remember Trump's inaugural speech that she would be working Linda McMahon, if she did her job right, would be out of a job soon, or something to that effect. So let's talk about, since you are an education, you are in the business of private education.
That's right.
Let's talk about the new College of Florida and the transformation that happened there, and what you helped to do in terms of eliminating DEI, first in the nation.
Yeah, first university in the nation to eliminate DEI. So I was appointed by DeSantis to be a trustee. And then next thing you know, even around DeSantis, there's a lot of people that are part of the political machine. So I had somebody that was kind of coaching me up and saying, this is what we need to do. You'd be great in this position. I'm like, thank you. But as soon as I signed that oath, my obligation is not to loyalty, it's to the Constitution.
Right.
That goes further to your question, your previous question, that the loyalty is to the Constitution. It's not to a political party. It's not to some friend. It's to we the people. So it looked like a scripted play. Now there's a sunshine law in Florida, so you can't talk to other trustees unless it's public, but it seemed to make sense what we were doing. We were going to eliminate DEI and be the first university to do that. Understand that New College of Florida is one of the top 5 most liberal woke universities. Over 50% of the population, when we were appointed, over 50% of the population identified as LGBTQIA. So this was the most hostile ground you could possibly imagine. So there was groups that were created called Mothers Against Rufo and Spear. So Chris Rufo was a big part of this. He articulated so beautifully the corruption and just how incredibly wrong and un-American DEI was. So we got rid of DEI, first university in the nation to do that. Then something very interesting happened, because I could see the same thing that happened with DEI is happening with the trans agenda with gender studies. And so we need to eliminate the gender studies department. Forgive me if you hear kids screaming. My office
You're
is
fine.
here in the school.
That's great.
So we've got the gender studies, and everybody was trying to tell me, hey, stop with the gender study. We did what we were supposed to do. I'm like, what? Who said what we were supposed to do? No, I signed an oath, and the taxpayers of Florida do not want to pay for this woke indoctrination of the trans agenda. So
Right.
I pushed and put all the trustees on blast and forced them to address the issue. So it was a big issue, and we were the first university in the nation to get rid of gender studies. A lot of people don't know that, and I'm particularly proud of putting of leading that charge. I didn't lead the DEI charge. I was the #1 cheerleader for Chris Rufo, who was doing that. But so that's what happened with New College of Florida, and then basically there was a lot of people who were trying to push me and were threatening me to not go up to the Florida Senate. Now this all ties back to Joe Gruters. If you give me a second to
Sure, please
try
tie
to-
it back, because people need to understand the level of nepotism and corruption in politics right now. Clearly.
It's crazy. So I didn't know Joe Gruters all that well. You know, I'm new to politics in 2024.
By the way, Joe's a nice guy. Just saying.
A very nice guy. That's part of the danger.
Yeah.
They're like, he couldn't possibly do these things. Well, he did. I don't know what else to say. He did. He won't, but he'll do it with a smile and a friendly face.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. Exactly. Yeah. So we got rid of gender studies. We got rid of the trans agenda at New College of Florida. Then all of a sudden, Sydney Gruters comes to New College of Florida without any lick of experience to run a foundation. I help her out. I tell her to hire. I have a person that was connected with my school that knows how to run a foundation. I put her, those two connected, and basically helped her to learn how to be how to run a foundation, because she didn't know how to run a foundation. She had zero experience. Now I got to be fair here that the person who I put there said she did pick it up, and she is smart. So I'm not saying she's incompetent, but she did not earn the position, and she did not have the experience. And I had to help by putting people on her staff who actually knew how to run a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one aspect. But the other aspect is that I was told that I shouldn't be doing what I was doing, and yet I did it anyway, pushing against the gender studies and the trans agenda. Then I come to find out
this is what President Trump stands with, and and Joe Gruters should represent the president of the he's RNC. Why would they go against what the president wants if they're RPOF, Republican Party of Florida, the national RNC, and they don't want you talking about gender studies?
Yeah, and they didn't want to. They wanted me to go away quietly. So 5 months later, the Senate it's a rubber stamp approval. They did not rubber stamp approve me. And I'm like, why? And I kept asking questions. Who, what, was this a mistake? No, this wasn't a mistake, but it was done quietly. And then I realized now after the fact that Joe Gruters has all the power within the Florida state legislature, within the Senate. And I'm like, okay, wow. So this makes sense. Then I do a little bit of research, and I realized that he wrote the bill to make trans a protected class in 2019 here in Florida. Thankfully, Florida rejected it. And for people who aren't from Florida, they need to understand that we've got a super majority in the Senate and the House and a Republican governor.
Right.
So this is supposed to be a very red state. And yet he has the audacity to try to force a trans agenda. And what that would mean is that at every school, you have to allow men into women's bathrooms. Every school has to allow for pronouns of a child's choosing. And it's the woke indoctrination around the trans agenda.
Yeah.
So he wrote the very bill. This is the head of the RNC. Are you kidding me? So you couldn't, now that I'm running against his wife, you couldn't ask for a better juxtaposition of two polar opposites. This is impactful for the entire nation.
I'd like to see you debate her on just this subject alone. I mean, I think that would be a pretty important debate. You know, another subject that's important in Florida, particularly, is our environment. I mean, we've battled with Lake Okeechobee and our canals being flooded with foam, and basically it's fertilizer overuse and residue that's creating algae blooms, et cetera. But it's never been tackled. It has never been tackled. So we have environmental corruption. Let's talk about Mosaic and so the regulatory carve-outs that they have gotten. They're a Fortune 500 company. We're going to talk about the polluted water, radioactive material in roads. And of course, we got to get into, of course, this anti-crony capitalism messaging, which, you know, clearly people are sick of it. We're sick of being, you know, capitalism is supposed to be a good thing, but it's not capitalism. It's corporatocracy. And it's a different thing than capitalism, right? Corporatocracy is more Marxist. It's when you take over and you have these public-private partnerships. It's been completely bastardized. Excuse me, but that's really what it is. So explain to us, talk to us about Mosaic.
Well, first, I'm thoroughly impressed with your knowledge of all these issues and the details. So yeah, FWC at a state level is pushing chemicals that people in the environmental movement, people bass fishing, everybody knows that this is causing so much more damage, but it's crony capitalism. It's a top-down approach. And the people at the top are going to continue to do it as long as they're making money and they're owning the businesses that are doing this work and you know, at the trough of the public expenditures of the public tax dollars. So Mosaic, Vernon Buchanan was one, and there was a bunch of others who are largely a part of the establishment. And Sidney Gruder's is just more the same. Joe Gruder's is more the same. They're actually even worse. They had a carve out in something called the Bevel Amendment. So the Bevel Amendment would carve out Mosaic and say, you don't have to adhere to the same environmental regulations that the rest of the country and every other mining operation has to adhere to, because phosphate's different and it's going to just be too expensive for you to do this in a clean way. So now you've got radioactive waste that is pushed, and they're trying to push this waste and they're trying to make it into roads so that they're trying so that every road in the state of Florida would be radioactive. And so I bought myself a Geiger counter, and now and I got to explain to people, I never thought, I was so sick of this global climate change grift that was happening. Now to find myself on the other side and saying, no, we've got to protect the environment is strange. It takes a while, but what you're going after is you're going after the corruption. It's not about this issue is good or bad. We can't look at these in a binary way other than corrupt or not corrupt. What is actually taking care of the people of Florida. So the Bevel Amendment is something that I would draft legislation to abolish. We need to abolish that amendment and that carve out and hold Mosaic accountable. But a little bit more information about these gypsum stacks. They're the mountains here in Florida. You see these large stacks of highly radioactive. You can't even come close to it. It is that poisonous. Now these large stacks seep into our aquifer, and there's been sinkholes in the entire that millions of gallons of toxic waste will go into the aquifer, and it causes the red tide, it causes fish kill, and it's polluting our very water. And
where are these gypsum stacks usually found?
Well, they're found everywhere where Mosaic is mining, and they're found in something called the Bone Valley, which is Hillsborough, Manatee County, down to Sarasota and DeSoto. So in that area is Bone Valley, in Hardy County is a big one. So you'll see these mountains, and you're driving by, and you see these mountains, and it doesn't look like much. It's like, wow, that's just a really big berm. Well, what happens is they take all the water, because they don't know what to do with it. They can't do anything with it, and they line this big lake. And they expect that to last for 1,000 years. It's not going to last for 1,000 years. And in fact, the limestone gets destroyed through a large number of things that are happening that aren't protecting the limestone. And then sinkholes are created, and sinkholes right underneath this massive weight of a lake that's above ground, some 50, 70, 80, 100 feet tall. This massive lake, and when that goes into the aquifer, all of our water is poisoned, and it goes out into the Gulf and causes the red tide. So it's not just one catastrophe that's waiting to happen. That has happened, and they've paid billions of dollars in fines for this happening, but they still haven't changed the regulation because they still have this Bevel Amendment carve out. And nobody here in Florida, the corruption of the Republican Party, they're not even addressing it. And the Democrats aren't either. This has generally been a Democrat issue. They're not addressing it.
Is funding candidates, I would imagine, with massive donations. I haven't pulled that up yet, but I will while you're talking. Why is DeSantis allowing this? Is DeSantis on the grift, or is he ignorant to this, or is he just doesn't think it's important?
It just hasn't. Look, politics, there's a lot of different carve outs of your political base. And my guess is that his carve out, and he just hasn't addressed it because nobody else has addressed it. And it hasn't made his radar the way it should. This is a Fortune 500 company. This is a massive company that is polluting and given a pass by the federal government. So I think this is a federal issue. I think it's also a state issue and a local issue. But at a county level, they need the support of the state, and we need the support of the federal government, so that it's something called you understand this is the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. We need to push decision making down as far as possible, try to eliminate all the power being at the top at a federal level. So that needs to happen. But also, look, either the EPA needs to be completely defunded, or they need to do their job. One of the two. You can't have both. You can't be paid to look the other way.
Defund. I'm sorry. All of these agencies, the work I've done, Eddie, these agencies are there to protect the industry that they're supposed to be protecting us from being harmed. They're there to regulate and protect the industry. It has nothing to do with us. This is unbelievable. I'm sitting at Wanda Scarborough just says Revelations talks about our water and land being poisoned. All the poisoning needs to stop: air, land, water, food, vitamins, medication, etc. And Christy says, time to get the crew together and tag DeSantis. We need to be relentless. She's right. We need to absolutely be relentless about this. This is just so disturbing. Wow.
When I first ran, I didn't know about this, and there was somebody by the name of Matt the Welder who was speaking truth. And he's running for ag commissioner right now. So he was speaking the truth, and I connected with him and connected with other people. And you just do your job as a representative, even as you're running as a candidate. You learn a whole lot. So I had no idea about this until Matt the Welder shared it with me. And now, you know what they're doing to Matt the Welder? They have created a law that says he can't run because he changed his name within the last 360 days to Matt the Welder. Well, the reason why he changed his name to Matt the Welder is because he couldn't get a nickname affidavit out of Hillsborough County the last time. So he's like, oh, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to actually change my name legally. And then they created a retroactive law that says now you can't run for ag commissioner. So he's in the middle of the lawfare right now with that. So I want to give a shout out because he's the one that turned me on to Mosaic and the corruption that's happening there.
Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff on Instagram and Facebook and so forth. He's really preaching the truth out there. God bless him and good for him. Now, the money machine is something that's, it takes money to run in these races, right? You have self-funded heavily in the past. I think a little over 500,000. You're currently underfunded. You've got about $50,000, somewhere. So you need to get money. You acknowledge that you're going to be massively outspent, especially if Sidney Reuters is running. And the strategy has been really for them just to kind of poison the well. So how do you combat the well poisoning that's going on from the RNC and the nepotism coming out of there, in addition to the fact you've got President Trump sort of giving an advance endorsement without her even being in the race, and having to raise money? What are you doing to separate yourself? Obviously podcasts, but what else can you do?
Yeah. So in order to win in politics, and I'm new to politics, but this axiom seems to hold true, you need to have two of three things. You need to have name recognition, favorability, and money. You got to have two of those things. Well, I'm not going to get the money, but I've already got the name recognition. And now people are warming up to the idea. Before, you're an incumbent, they don't know who I am. I'm spitting truths out there, and they're like, well, that's a little bit hard to, oh, he's new and he's different. All those things are gaining more and more momentum, and people are like recognizing the truth of what I said during the last election cycle. So there's a lot of things that are moving in the right direction, but we still absolutely need to make and raise more money. We're less than $50,000 right now, but we plan on winning this at a tremendous disadvantage, much like Paxton is doing against Cornyn. Cornyn and the RNC, Joe Gruters, has spent over $100 million trying to prop up a rhino with name recognition. So they got two, and I think they're still going to lose because Paxton has name recognition and favorability, but he doesn't have the money. He's been outspent 25-1 at this stage, and I think it's going to be similar in this race. Very similar in this race, that we're going to be outspent. But see, I'm so mad I can't spit. We're going to be outspent, and we're going to have to make sure that people understand, and just being shaking hands and getting to know people, and the word of mouth. If you're speaking the truth, it's not going to shrink back. It's going to just keep growing. So the truth keeps moving forward. It's a cumulative. There's a accretive effect of the truth. And so as long as you're standing for the truth, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. I don't want to say that I still need money and still need donations. So please help in this fight. But this is a national fight for the soul of this country. And speaking of the soul of this country, the corrupt nature of the Epstein files. Are you kidding me? The Epstein files with Pam Bondi, who's been a part of this lobbyist revolving door into government and going back and just perfecting the grift machine. When she goes up there and says, hey, don't worry about the Epstein files, the Dow's at 50K. It doesn't matter if the Dow goes to 2000K if we've lost our soul. And we cannot have a two-tier system of justice, let alone a two-tier system of justice with pedophiles at the top. Are you kidding me?
So how do you interpret Trump's early encouragement of your opponent then? Can voters still support Trump and question endorsements? In other words, can they support you while questioning his endorsements?
Well, Susie Wiles and Joe Gruters, specifically Joe Gruters, has insulted the people of Florida's 16th congressional district and the entire nation by assuming that we're just going to swallow whatever the Republican Party says and whatever Trump endorses. So they control those endorsements. They push those endorsements. And
is it Susie Wiles pushing the endorsements and Trump just signing off on it because he's too busy to pay attention to this at this point? Is he just trusting her too much?
I believe so, but I don't know what's going on in his head. At some point, he's got to recognize that these defeats, that he has a part to play in it. He shouldn't have selected Joe Gruters. He could still change this. He can fire Joe Gruters right now, and it could still be salvaged. And so he should fire Joe Gruters right now for the conservative causes. Otherwise, it's not going to look good in midterms.
He's endorsed Lindsey Graham. I mean, how do you wrap your head around that and reconcile it?
You can't.
You can't. So let's talk about what you're going to do. Let's talk about some policy, some action, some strategy you're going to take. What's your first legislative priority once you're in there?
Well, I said I'd draft legislation to repeal the Bevel Amendment. So that's one of the things. Term
limits. Okay.
Term limits. Absolutely. This is
Are you going to term limit yourself to 2 terms, 3 terms?
Absolutely. I would, you go through the entire process. I'm not going to hold myself something. I want to hold everybody to term limits. I I guarantee you I would not be there more than 10 years. And I don't even think
Okay.
more than 8 years. Now, some term limits, I've already agreed that I would sign legislation for 6 years. There's legislation that's there for 12 years. I would sign both. I would sign and I would push for term limits.
Okay.
Where it is, it just needs to be there. I think 8 years is a good time.
Okay.
6 years,
What
I've already
about-
agreed to sign that legislation.
All right. So what specifically, because you talked a lot about Mosaic, that is very disarming.
Yeah.
What specifically would you do about Mosaic and this environmental corruption? How would you, I mean, because we've got the EPA involved, obviously.
Yeah.
There's a lot of corporate money going around. You've got probably members in the state legislature involved. Who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe the governor. I have no idea.
Well, this is what you do. You end up naming names and calling people out, and you signal what corruption hates is sunlight.
Yeah.
And people, I've noticed that when I go to some of these Republican events, I'm like the plague. Nobody wants to even have a conversation with me.
I know the
You know,
feeling.
or other people will come and they'll want to. They're like, I love what you're doing. It's amazing. But other people are like, oh, don't talk to him. He'll put you on blast. And that's right. I will put you on blast if you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would end up doing. I would call out bad votes, and I would try to put together legislation where people have to expose themselves.
Okay. So how do you win? How do you win without a money advantage? And, how do you pair that with what the grassroots power actually looks like this year in 2026?
So I think we can win. I think we continue doing what we did. We went from 0 to 40%. All we need is another 11%. And I think we just keep hitting different areas with the same message. The message doesn't change, other than there's issues. AI data centers, that's one. If we want to talk about,
Well, let's talk about it, because I don't want them anywhere in my state.
Yeah, but why? Because of the environmental impact, for sure. But there's a deeper reason that I'm very concerned about, is this top-down control of the economy that is happening. Trump has brought in Zuckerberg and Ellison and all these big tech to create this monopoly. And that's what the AI data centers, it's government subsidies when we don't need subsidies. The real power of our country is American ingenuity and the freedom to create new solutions. And so I had a data center before it was a AI data center, back before I started the school. So I started a software company. So I understood, in a consulting company. So I understand what it takes to actually win and compete in technology. And it's not a top-down control. It is leveling the playing field. Government does have a job in regulating interstate commerce. So we can't look at this and say government shouldn't be involved. No, they do have a job, but it certainly isn't to pick winners and losers in a top-down control. That is on the verge of socialism and communism. And that's what's happening right there before our eyes. Government is growing, the debt is expanding, and there's more command and control within industries. Our government is taking positions of ownership in these tech companies. Now, I agree, the art of a deal, and we shouldn't just give things away, but we shouldn't be changing the lines of the competition of the field of battle. We need to let the best ideas win. It needs to be a meritocracy, and we need to allow for a distributed AI computing model rather than these massive general AI data centers that would just be used as barriers to entry for other AI models to flourish. And it needs to be distributed. It doesn't even make sense technically from an architectural standpoint. Everything is moving to distributed commuting, not this mainframe idea of old. It doesn't even work. So they're subsidizing this, and they're destroying the environment through subsidies that they're trying to create. The globalist, this, just like there's the grift with solar and the grift with carbon footprints. Now it's the grift with AI and general AI. And now you're getting a bunch of conservatives saying, yeah, we need to be technically superior. Otherwise, we're going to lose to China. That's not the case. That's not how you win. Not through subsidies. That destroys.
That's right.
That destroys competition and
It
innovation.
does. Yeah, it does. It absolutely does, Eddie. I could not agree with you more on that. I had these discussions when I was a little girl with my family growing up. My parents are very politically active, and we were always talking about, free market capitalism. That's the free market economy. It always sorts itself out.
Yes.
Necessity is the mother of invention,
Yes.
right? Case in point.
And Americans, and I love telling this story because all the way back, by the way, I've got a winter soldier that's a part of the overall marketing strategy. It's not even a marketing strategy, it's just who we are. It's the winter soldier versus the sunshine patriot. So we've got somebody who, and a bunch of people that will wear Valley Forge and revolutionary garb and go out there and say, we're fighting for this nation and for our freedoms. So where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought.
Winter soldier versus sunshine patriot.
Yes, thank you. I basically tell people that the foreign mercenaries that came in and were working with General Washington didn't know what to make of American soldiers at the time, because they said, we tell them to do something, they won't do it. They want to know why. And he said that as an insult, but that's really a tremendous compliment to the DNA that is American. We are different. We are exceptional. And we want to know why, because we're trying to take a look at the broader picture and solve bigger problems. We need to know why that fierce freedom and independence is in our DNA, and we need to unleash it and not to suppress it. And that's what happens in a top-down economy, a command and control economy.
You're absolutely right. And this is unfortunately where we are right now. And we're being, as we say, kettled like fish into a digital Palantir prison. And we've got to push back on that very, very hard.
Yes.
Eddie, I have your website up here. Right here, it's just a couple of your issues. America First, clearly, the America First Party is off and running here in Florida.
Yes.
You clearly want to dismantle the bureaucratic cancer. We've had folks in the chat that have said, we basically need to get rid of all federal agencies. In the beginning, our country only had a military and I think a post office. We need anything else being run by the state. It feeds corruption. Well, Wanda, you're right. I could not agree more on that statement. And of course, medical freedom. I think medical freedom is one of the reasons that you decided to get into this race, something that happened during COVID. You want to expand on that?
Yeah. But before I forget, I want to talk to everybody about America First.
Go for it.
So I mentioned Anthony Pedicini, Joe Gruters, and then when we turned Anthony Pedicini's name into mud here in Manatee County, we knew exactly what he's going to do. He's going to push somebody by the name of Jennings DePriest. And Jennings DePriest is a part of those 5 people that are now, quote unquote, operating the REC that the 180 actually grassroots Republicans got kicked out of. So follow this. Jennings DePriest has put together a PAC, political committee, and the name of it is America First. Like, are you kidding me? Because they're planning on doing exactly what they did last time. They steal virtue. They'll steal virtuous claims, and they will push and force patronage to the candidates, to their corrupt candidates of their choosing. That's the way they control. And he's actually went ahead and secured America First as a political action committee so that he can send flyers out at the last and send tweet and use their money to say America First says Eddie Spear's bad. And Eddie Spear doesn't stand for America First values. And so this is the war that we're up against. They're shameless. They're not even they can't hide it, but they're just maximizing it, and they're counting on the American people to be ignorant. And American people are waking up. Josie Tomkow and Paxton have shown that the people are waking up to the grift and the lies of the Republicans in name only. So back to, you had asked about medical freedom.
Right.
So you really don't know what you're going to do until you're pressed. You don't know how you're going to react. I didn't know how I'd react. I just want to live in peace. I just want to start the school and educate students. But then all of a sudden COVID comes along, and I'm like, this immediately do some research and find out that this is gain of function research that was leaked and came out of Wuhan, China. So that information was out there immediately. And so we could recognize that this was a manufactured crisis. So then the next step is, what are they going to do, and how are they going to maximize this manufactured crisis? So one of the things is just the complete fear and the command and control economy. How far can these people go with controlling everything under the guise of a crisis, even if it's a false crisis? So they shut down schools, and they said, you have to have a mask mandate and you have to wear a mask. The whole nation, we all remember this. But what happened here was different in our school. So I recognize this, and it was hard to fight against, because everybody was filled with so much fear. It was hard to fight against your own teachers, your parents, and everybody else. But we fought against it and said, this isn't true, and it's going to be incredibly harmful to people if they wear masks. But you can choose to wear a mask if you want, but we're not going to make everybody wear a mask. If you don't want to do that, then you don't have to go to school here. That's okay. So that was hard in and of itself. But then there was a video that went out and made national news next of us having fun and being at school and welcoming all the students back. So then you've got helicopters flying around, you've got everybody calling, and I got the police knocking on the door saying, okay, you've got to enforce this mandate. And that was a big crisis. I knew it was a lie. But before then, understand that I'm committed to God and to Jesus Christ, and I follow what he says in the Bible. That's why I mentioned the Bible and the Constitution. So I recognize that in Romans 13, it says we're supposed to obey our government. And I really struggled with that. That was very difficult. So it took a while to recognize that there's a precedent in the Bible of Paul. He was under one court system, and they said, you need to go back to Jerusalem. He knew he was going to be killed if he goes back to Jerusalem. And what he did is he appealed to Caesar. He appealed to a higher authority. And thank God that our founding fathers understood that and have the Constitution has the ultimate authority of a free people here in the United States. Right. So I basically told the police and I told the code enforcement, no, you can't come. This is private property, and we will continue to not enforce an unlawful mandate. Now, you got to understand, that means that they could take me to jail. That means I could be stuck for the next 20 years going all the way to the Supreme Court fighting this thing. But that's what you do. If you stand for the truth, and by God's grace, that's not what happened. They stood down. They didn't say, hey, you're right, sorry. They just kind of never came back.
Where are you on the whole property tax issue? Should it be abolished for homesteaded properties and maintained for, second home buyers?
That is some of the specifics at a state level. I can tell you that I support tax cuts anywhere and everywhere. We don't
I know you won't be able to weigh in on it, but as a homeowner in Florida,
I would love to see that. I am definitely for eliminating the property taxes, and I think it can be done. A lot of people say it can't be done. No, we've got a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We've got a spending problem in the state of Florida, and in a county government. It's everywhere. It's human nature, and we've got to be diligent to fight against it at every step.
Yeah, Blaise Ignolia is doing a great job, I think, going around and exposing the grift. County by county.
Well, and I've been saying this, and I'll say it again. I wish I could copyright Elvis Presley's song. We need a little more action, a little less talk.
That's right.
And I'm not saying there's steps. So I applaud the talk, but we need to see action. We need to see it actually happen, and that takes a lot of work. And
it does.
But that's where you're going to tell, who's real and who's not, who's going to actually do the work to get it done.
Amen.
And those are the candidates that we need. Even if you're fighting, even if you're standing alone, you've got to fight.
I couldn't agree more with you there. Eddie, I want to give you just a minute. Go ahead and give my audience, Floridians, this is for you, especially if you're in the 16th district. This man is going to be hopefully your next congressman. Eddie, tell the folks why they should vote for you. What's in it for the people of Florida?
What's in it is I'll show up and I'll talk and I'll have a conversation and I'll debate with anybody, with Democrats, with anybody, and do the job of a representative. I've done it through the campaign already. I'm the largest grassroots movement that Manatee and Southern Hillsborough County has ever seen by measured by the number of petitions. So I've been out there talking to people. Hopefully you see our soldiers on street corners. You see my balloons at parks. We are out there doing the work, and we believe in constitutional conservatism, and we believe in fighting the corruption, whether it's Republican or Democrat. It's the uniparty. And they have not been our friends, and I will call them out and be a representative and do my job, and then gladly go home. Yeah.
Fantastic. Eddie Spear, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and for stopping by here to campaign a little bit on our show and get people to understand who you are and that you really are taking on. You're the David in this battle with Goliath, the machine. The RNC is not the friends of the Republicans. It's a friends to the rhinos. But if anything MAGA knows and America Firsters know is that we don't do rhino. We do conservative values, period, dot. And you have tied it together beautifully. Go ahead.
Well, one last thing to tie it together. Just remember, everybody, if you're going to take out a rhino, you're going to need a spear. Eddie Spear for Congress.
I love it. Eddie Spear for Congress. S-P-E-I-R.
That's right.
S-P-E-I-R. Eddie Spear for Congress. It's F-O-R. His website is streaming down below. I will show it to you one more time just so you can take a look at it. Let's see here. We'll go back to your home page. There he is. Eddie Spear, S-P-E-I-R. He's running for Congress in the Florida 16th District. And again, he has put $500,000 of his own money in. Folks, if you want to help support him, I always say every member of Congress impacts votes all over the nation. And I think that's never more evident than the SAVE Act, which we just couldn't get over the hump for whatever reason. Sad to say, we don't have a Congress that works for us. We have a Congress that works for, well, other countries, other companies. It's definitely not for the people. Mosaic included. Eddie, thanks so much for stopping by today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Take care. Well, that's a wrap. This has been about a 2-hour show, but I think it was nice to end with Eddie because, you know, as I always say, and I just got done saying, this race isn't just about what's happening in my beautiful Sunshine State, despite the fact that somebody's spraying us today, like the roaches that they think we are. This is really about whether or not we still have a voice and whether the system has decided who gets to represent us before we even vote. Case in point, you know, Joe Gruder's wife, he's the chairman of the RNC nationally, throwing the idea around that maybe she wants to run for a race, but you've got somebody who's already been in the game and he's a business owner. He's really MAGA. Apparently my dog thinks so too. He's America First. And, you know, this is somebody who deserves a look. He is one of we the people. I think if you spent just this hour today with us and listened to Eddie, you understand he is the salt and light of what we the people are, the essence. He understands that our Constitution is founded on biblical principles. And if we have to, because if a candidate can be elevated before they even file, if a Sidney Gruters can get a attaboy from somebody before they file, and if this big old machine that we seem to be up against, it's we the people against the uniparty machine, can align before we actually get a chance to speak, before we get to go to the poll, we're not actually picking leaders anymore, are we? We're just getting told who is being handed out to us. Well, Eddie Spear is here today, and he's refusing to accept that. And you know what? I refuse to accept it too. So get out and vote, folks. We have midterms coming up. August is the midterm here in Florida. We've got midterms for this race against Lindsey Graham in June. If you're in North Carolina listening to this, please, I'm sorry, South Carolina, please, South Carolina, vote for Mark Lynch because you don't want Lindsey Graham. He makes a big difference. He's a neocon warmonger, and we're kind of done with that. We want to focus back on America, put America first, and that's what Eddie Spear embodies. Thanks so much for being here today, guys. I appreciate all of you. God bless, and have a good rest of your Wednesday.